basically, I think this... No. Hello. So, today we are doing the mid-year book freakout tag. I know I'm a little bit late. Basically, they give me some questions and I have to answer them. So here we go. How much have I read? I read 42 books and 7 short stories. I usually don't read this much. Like last year I read 24 books in total in the whole year, I think. So this is definitely the year I've read most since high school. So I'm pretty happy with my numbers. I think I'm also gonna try and get like 3 more short stories in so that I can have 10 short stories and I count that as a book, like a story collection or something. Anyway, next question. What's the best book I've read so far in 2020? The best book, I actually finished it just the other day, so like 2 days ago. I finished it 2 days ago, and it's The Mountains Sing by Nguyễn Phan. I decided to read this book because someone said that it would be similar to Homegoing, but I thought it's gonna be really hard to beat because Homegoing was 5 stars. It was a really good book, but I decided to read it anyway, and I loved The Mountains Sing. Like, I loved it more than Homegoing. That's a lot. So basically, The Mountains Sing is about a grandma and a grandchild living in Vietnam, Hanoi, and it kind of skips between when the grandchild is growing up, so like the present day of the story, and the grandma talking about her, telling the grandchild her life, right? And so it's not a book that I recommend to anyone, everyone. Like, it's set in Vietnam, so it's really sad and hard to read and depressing. Basically, like, if you think that it's bad at the start, it gets worse and worse and worse and worse and worse and worse, and I'm probably not selling it very well, but it's the best book I've read this year. Like, I usually don't get attached to characters in any book, but I really loved the grandma by the end. Yeah, it's one of the few books that has made me emotional this year. So that's my favourite book of the year. And my other favourite was The Blue Fox by Sjón. I recommend that you go in blind with this book. Like, don't read the back cover, don't read anything about this book. It's short, like a novella. It's about a fox and a hunter and these snowy mountains, and it's Iceland. That's it. That's all I'm gonna say. Biggest disappointment. I know this one's gonna be controversial because it's a very popular book, but I'm gonna say Convenience Store Woman by Sayaka Murata. And it's not a bad book. Like, I know I can understand why many people like it, but for me personally, I'm not a big fan of, like, when there's the entire plot of a book revolves around, I guess, miscommunication between characters. Like, if they can just sit down and talk about it and solve the issue and that's the end of the plot, then it's kind of frustrating to read the whole book when there's such a simple solution to it, right? So, biggest surprise in the positive sense. So, okay, A Carpet Ride to Khiva by Cristopher Aslan Alexander. I actually was looking for a different book about Uzbekistan called Beyond the Oxus or something, but I couldn't find it. So I was like, okay, I'll read this one. And I ended up falling in love with Uzbekistan by the end of this book. Like, I felt homesick for Uzbekistan, even though I've never been and I know nothing about the country. But anyway, this one's about the author. It's an autobiography, and the author goes to Uzbekistan and he works in a carpet workshop for a few years, and he basically talks about his life there, living in the country. Carpets, lots of carpets. He talks about going to Afghanistan to buy dyes and corruption and like cotton, like a lot of like cultural aspects that they have in Uzbekistan. So yeah, it's really interesting. It was a surprise that I liked it so much. It was my first 5-star read of the year, so I read it in January, so that was a good start to the year. And the other surprise was Metro 2033 by Dmitry Glukhovsky. So I have a rule that says that if I read a book by a foreign country and I don't like it, then I have to read another book from that country. I read The Seagull by Anton Chekhov, I think, and I didn't like it that much. It was a 3-star, wasn't that bad. But then I was like, okay, I have to read another book from Russia. This one's about a nuclear war, and the survivors are living in the underground metro system of Moscow. So, and then every station is like a different town, and they have to like go between the stations, walking through the tunnels for like trade and stuff. So the main character has to basically, he's on a mission and he has to go from one station to a different station. So he goes through these tunnels and there are mysterious things happening, and he meets lots of interesting characters along the way. And basically, I think this book has one of the best descriptions of like terror and fear that I've ever read in a book. So I think it's worth reading for that alone. Wait for the train to go past. Underrated gems you've discovered recently. I've never heard anyone talk about The Cure by Basma Abdel Aziz. It's such a shame that no one's read this book. Like, I'm gonna be honest, I read it just because the cover is yellow, and yellow is my favorite color. So that was, I didn't really think that deeply about it. It's inspired by the Arab Spring, and basically one day a gate appears in the middle of the city. People have to go to the gate to like get the papers signed and like get permission to do basically anything, and like administrative stuff and paperwork, right? And so they start queuing up in front of the gate, and the gate doesn't open. So every day the queue just gets longer and longer and longer and longer. Its brilliance comes from being totally absurd. So I think it's really interesting that the author kind of took something of the collective imagination and kind of took it to the extreme, kind of exaggerated it a lot. And like sometimes it was really funny, and other times it was just like worrying that what the characters decide to do. A book that made me cry. So everything I read is depressing and sad, most of it. But I've cried with 2 this year. And one was The Mountains Sing that I mentioned earlier, and the other one is Please Look After Mum by Kyung-Sook Shin. So South Korean author. It's about a mum that goes missing. And I don't know why I'm laughing, that's not funny. And so the kids have to find her. So they kind of think about like remembering how they've treated their mum in the past during their lives growing up. It definitely made me think about my own mum and the mistakes I've made in the past. And it was a very emotional book. But yeah, it was very good. Like, I gave it 4.5 stars, I think, also, like just like Metro 2033, because it does have quite a few mentions of like animal abuse or like accidentally harming animals or like culturally accepted ways of harming animals, right? And so if you're kind of sensitive towards that, it's something to have in mind. Books that made me happy. everything I read is depressing and sad. Okay, I'm gonna say Homegoing by Yaa Gyasi. That it's not a happy book. Like, it has murder and kidnapping and slavery and other horrible things, drugs, I don't know. But it made me happy because we get to know some characters at the start, and then the next chapter is about their children, and the next chapter is about the children of the children, and so it kind of goes every generation like that, right? And I really loved seeing a character at the start and then seeing them mentioned later on as they were like an adult, and mentioned again later on as they were getting old. And because I loved most of the characters, it was so nice to kind of see them and their family and them growing up, and I felt that was very heartwarming. Oh, I also read The Gentleman's Guide to Vice and Virtue by Mackenzie, which is a YA, young adult. It's not my genre, but it was fun to read. Most beautiful book is an illustrated book, Sea Prayer by Khaled Hosseini. He's the author of Kite Runner, 100 Splendid Suns, I think. I haven't read it. I haven't read either of those two books. But yeah, it's basically a story of a refugee, a family of refugees, and like crossing the Mediterranean. The artwork is just so beautiful. And the last question, goals for the rest of the year. So my goal for the rest of the year is to read 31 books. The reason why I want to read 31 books is simply because I decided to make a cover collage sorted by colours, and at the start of the year I read a whole lot of yellow cover books, and now I need to read lots of like green and red cover books to kind of make it look good. And so I have lots of red and green books on my list for later, for the second half of this year. Yeah. Oh, and also finish the books that I've already started. 5, 6, 7, 8. So I have 8 books currently. I'm currently reading 8 books. So the 2 priorities right now are In Praise of Hatred by Khaled Khalifa, and the other book is The Rainbow Troops by Andrea Hirata. So someone from Indonesia recommended this book to me because they said it was a really popular book in Indonesia, and so I started reading it. The problem is I loved it so much that I didn't want it to end, and so I stopped reading it, and I haven't picked it back up again. So I stopped reading it like 3 or 4 months ago. So anyway, it is a good book. So those are the best books and one disappointing book that I've read this year. I'm excited for the rest of the year because I have some good stuff happening. I might join a book club later on, and oh, there's the reading rush next week. I'm going to be reading 2 books for that. Yeah, anyway, that's it. Happy reading to all of you as well. Bye.